Her laughter pierced through the clatter of cutlery and celebratory chatter. In an instant, the air seemed to drain from the room, leaving me gasping for something I couldn't name. Chloe's grin, all too familiar, stretched across her face. A mirror image of Mom's, yet somehow sharper, less forgiving. She leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping just enough to carry a private little sting to my ears. "Seriously, Paige? This is it? Columbus, Georgia? Forever? You're such a small-timer. My 22 years on this planet, living and breathing in this very city, felt like they'd just been condensed into a single dismissive sneer. That comment landed with the weight of a dropped anvil, crushing any nascent joy I'd managed to conjure for my own college graduation luncheon. Around us, the sun streamed through the restaurant windows, illuminating the happy faces of my relatives, oblivious to the invisible shrapnel flying in my direction. My cousin, Liam, across the table, was mid-story about his new engineering gig in Atlanta, his voice buoyant, full of future. Meanwhile, my future felt like a blank page, or worse, a page already written in someone else's hand, annotated with small time in red ink. A hot, unwelcome flush crept up my neck, settling a burning halo around my ears. Every fiber of my being wanted to lash out, to scream that she didn't understand, that not everyone wanted to conquer the world, or at least not her version of it. But the words just congealed in my throat, a thick, unpalatable paste. What was the point? Chloe, 2 years my senior, had always possessed this uncanny knack for deflating my aspirations, for making my dreams feel like child's play compared to her grand pronouncements. She'd always been the one destined for big cities, big law firms, big everything. And me? I was just here, in Columbus, Georgia, where I'd grown up, where my family was, and where I'd just earned my degree from the local university. My roots felt less like anchors and more like chains in that moment. A wave of profound inadequacy washed over me, chilling me to the bone despite the warmth of the room. It wasn't just her words. It was the conviction behind them, the way she made it sound like an undeniable, universal truth, as if my choices, my quiet ambitions, were inherently lesser. A bitter taste coated my tongue, a mixture of resentment and a raw, uncomfortable truth. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was settling. Maybe my comfort zone had become a cage I hadn't even realized I was in. The thought was a venomous bite, burrowing deep under my skin. My gaze drifted across the room, past the linen-draped tables and the floral centerpieces, to the small stage at the front. A microphone stood sentinel, waiting. The university dean, Dr. Evans, a kind-faced woman with a penchant for long, inspiring speeches, was chatting animatedly with a stern-looking man in a dark suit. A judge, someone had whispered earlier. From where I hadn't caught. What was he doing here? A vague sense of unease settled in my stomach, a premonition of something beyond the usual graduation pleasantries. My mind started to drift, replaying every minor slight, every backhanded compliment Chloe had ever thrown my way. The time she called my art minor a cute hobby when she was studying for her LSATs, or when she'd scoffed at my internship at the local community legal aid office, comparing it to her real corporate law experience. It was a well-worn track, this particular mental loop, but today it dug deeper, leaving a fresh wound. A gentle touch on my arm startled me. It was my boyfriend, Ethan, his brow furrowed with concern. He knew Chloe's particular brand of casual cruelty. He always did. His hand squeezed mine, a silent offering of support, a lifeline in the suddenly churning waters of my self-doubt. I managed a weak smile, but the turmoil inside was a raging storm. The judge at the podium cleared his throat, a sharp, attention-grabbing sound. The chatter in the room began to fade, replaced by an expectant hush. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. What was coming? A dangerous quiet settled around me, a pre-announcement calm that felt anything but peaceful. A part of me, the part Chloe had just labeled small time, braced for another blow. That casual cruelty from Chloe, the kind Ethan instinctively recognized, wasn't a new development. It felt like a fundamental thread woven through the fabric of my entire existence. My mind drifted back, away from the clinking silverware and the muted conversations of the luncheon, to a different time, a different setting. What came to mind was our old house, the one with the porch swing that always squeaked, even after Dad, Daniel, oiled it for the 100th time. I can still picture Chloe back then, maybe 8 years old, a year older than me. She possessed this uncanny knack for finding my deepest insecurities and just poking them. Not with a shout, never with a yell, but with a quiet, knowing smile, a whisper, a little dismissive gesture. Mom, Sarah, often missed it. Or maybe she just chose to. There was always this air around Chloe, like she was the delicate one, the one who needed protecting, the one whose feelings were more fragile. My own reactions, my own hurt, often got overlooked in the shadow of her perceived vulnerability. One afternoon surfaces vividly, a hot Georgia summer day. We were playing in the backyard, near the old oak tree, making mud pies. I was so proud of my creation, a lopsided, leaf-decorated concoction I thought was a masterpiece. I held it up to Chloe, my small fingers caked with dirt, my face alight with childish pride. Her eyes scanned it, a flicker of something I couldn't decipher, then crossing her face before she simply shrugged. "That's it," she murmured, her voice just loud enough to reach me, but soft enough that if Mom had been listening from the kitchen window, she wouldn't have heard the sting. Mine's way better. She hadn't even made one. The words themselves weren't much, but the way they landed, the way they deflated my simple joy, that was the first little prick of 1,000 to come. Moments like those piled up, one after another, creating a silent architecture of neglect and subtle dismissal. It wasn't outright bullying, nothing you could point to and say, "Look, she hit me." Instead, it was this slow, steady erosion, like water wearing down stone. There was a period, when I was around 11, where Dad, Daniel, started working those crazy overnight shifts. He'd be gone before we woke up, sometimes not back until after we were in bed. His absence left a noticeable void, particularly for me. Chloe, always adept at navigating the family currents, seemed to absorb Mom's attention, leaving me adrift. I'd try to tell Mom about my day, about some new drawing I'd done, or a funny thing a classmate said, and her gaze would often drift past me, settling on Chloe, who might be quietly reading a book or meticulously organizing her doll collection. A quiet sigh, a non-committal hum, those were often my only replies. Looking back now, it hits me. It wasn't just Mom's preoccupation with Chloe, it was the way Chloe subtly encouraged it. She'd always be the one with a scraped knee right when I needed to talk, or a sudden headache that required Mom's full attention. A quiet observation now. Chloe always seemed to know how to pull focus. It felt like a subtle, calculated performance, a way to ensure she remained the central figure in Mom's universe. My attempts at connection often dissolved into the background, unheard, unseen. There was a Christmas, I must have been 13, when I'd spent weeks working on a hand-knitted scarf for Mom. It was lumpy in places, the stitches uneven, but I'd poured my heart into it. I wrapped it carefully, envisioning her smile. Chloe, my older sister, caught sight of it before I could present it. Her gaze drifted over the messy stitches. "Seriously, Paige," she scoffed, a little smirk playing on her lips. "Mom will probably just use that as a coaster." The words stung, a familiar icy dart, making my earnest effort feel like a joke. Despite the sting, I presented it. On Christmas morning, Mom opened it, offered a quick, polite smile, and set it aside. Chloe, right after, presented her with a store-bought, perfectly soft cashmere scarf. Mom gasped, pulling Chloe into a tight hug, exclaiming over the luxurious feel of it. She wore that cashmere scarf all winter. Mine? It stayed in the gift bag, forgotten. That small, discarded present. The way it just sat there on the floor, perfectly wrapped but utterly unwanted. It still stings, a cold knot in my chest. These days her barbs had matured, growing more subtle, more insidious. Now, at 22, living back in Columbus, Georgia, and finishing up my degree, her presence felt like a constant shadow. I'd dedicated weeks to my capstone project, a digital portfolio showcasing my graphic design work. The deadlines were tight, the pressure immense. My desk, usually a haven of scattered sketches and post-it notes, was meticulously organized, a battle station for creativity. One afternoon, I returned from a quick coffee run to find a stack of my printed proofs, the ones I'd painstakingly color-corrected, sitting askew, a half-empty soda can leaving a damp ring on the top sheet. Nearby, on my keyboard, rested a crumpled receipt from a fast food joint. It was a minor transgression, nothing overtly malicious, yet it spoke volumes. It signaled a disregard for my space, for my work, for me. A tremor of unease rippled through me. This wasn't the first time. My design software would occasionally be left open on my laptop, the files accessed. My favorite pen, the one with the fine tip I used for detailed sketches, would disappear, only to resurface later in the kitchen. It was never anything missing permanently, never anything truly broken. Just displaced, disrespected, a creeping sense of being observed, of my personal boundaries being silently breached, began to settle. The apartment, which had once felt like my sanctuary, a place where I could truly unwind and focus, now carried an unfamiliar hum of intrusion. Each instance was too insignificant to confront directly, too easy to dismiss as accidental. Yet, the cumulative effect was undeniable. A strange, unsettling tension began to pervade my daily rhythm. I'd find myself checking things, just little things, when I walked into my study area. Was my laptop exactly where I'd left it? Was that sketch still pinned to the board? This creeping suspicion, this silent distrust, was starting to color everything. It was like she was trying to leave her mark on my achievements too, making them just a little less mine. A thought began to coalesce, one I didn't dare give voice to. Perhaps some people don't want you to succeed. That tremor of unease settled deep within me, a persistent ache. My design software, the files I worked on, the exact pen I preferred. These minor invasions weren't just inconvenient. They were a declaration. Each morning, the ritual of making my coffee became a tense performance. The clatter of the mug against the counter seemed to echo too loudly in the hushed kitchen, as if signaling my presence, inviting scrutiny. I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to find someone standing there, assessing my movements, judging the strength of my brew. My Columbus, Georgia home, the very place I'd sought comfort, now felt like a stage where I was constantly being observed and found wanting. The silence that draped over our family interactions morphed into something sharper than any raised voice. It was a pointed absence of sound. Text messages from my sister became scarce, or if they did arrive, they were clipped, monosyllabic. There was no warmth, no inquiry, just a cold digital distance. My attempts to bridge this chasm, to simply inquire about her day, would vanish into the void of unread receipts. Mom, bless her heart, would offer responses that felt like echoes, devoid of substance. She'd nod vaguely when I mentioned my class projects, her gaze drifting past me, as though I were a transparent pane of glass. It was an emotional starvation, leaving me parched for affirmation, for any genuine connection. I remember once, during a particularly heavy quiet spell, attempting to voice the discomfort. We were at the kitchen table, the three of us, Mom, my sister, and I, picking at dinner. The air was thick, oppressive. I cleared my throat, the sound embarrassingly loud. "It feels different in here lately," I began, my voice a tentative whisper. "Like the atmosphere is strained." Mom merely pushed a piece of broccoli around her plate. My sister offered a dismissive sniff, a barely perceptible shrug of her shoulders, as if my observation was utterly trivial, perhaps even imagined. My words evaporated, unheard, unacknowledged. The invalidation stung, a familiar sensation. It was like speaking into a gale-force wind. Nothing I said could ever truly penetrate. My personal space, my bedroom, that sanctuary where I used to retreat and create, started to feel like a surveillance zone. Every shadow seemed to hold a hint of judgment. I'd find myself tidying obsessively, moving my laptop, tucking away sketches, as if trying to erase any trace of my passions. Anything that could be deemed small time. The once reassuring walls now seemed to press in, making the space feel constricting. I'd scroll through my social media feeds, not for connection, but for distraction, a means to escape the palpable tension that permeated the house. Each post I saw from friends, their carefree smiles, their easygoing banter, served only to highlight the rigid, joyless existence I navigated daily. There was an evening, just after sunset, when I stood before the bathroom mirror. The light was dim, casting long, distorted shadows. I'd just tried to send a longer text to my sister, something about a shared memory, a desperate plea for normalcy. My thumb hovered over the send button. Then I hesitated. What was the point? It would just be met with silence, or worse, a cutting remark. My own reflection stared back at me, a stranger with tired eyes. I saw the weight of unspoken words, the fatigue of constant emotional vigilance. A profound sadness washed over me, a silent, internal wave. No sound escaped my lips, but my throat tightened, a sharp, physical ache. I deleted the message, watching the words vanish, just like so many other attempts to connect. The person staring back from the glass wasn't Paige Sanchez, the aspiring designer, the one with big dreams. She was just here. A ghost of herself, adrift in a sea of unacknowledged pain. That creeping apprehension, that sense of something being off, had been my constant companion lately. It clung to me, a faint, persistent scent of smoke when there was no fire. My attempts to connect with my sister, even just a simple text, often hit a wall, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated. One particular afternoon, the air thick with the humid Columbus, Georgia summer, I walked past the shared study space in our home. A flicker of light from the laptop caught my attention. It was my sister's, left open, a habit that usually didn't bother me. This time, however, something was different. My gaze snagged on an open messaging application, its interface unfamiliar to me. Curiosity, or perhaps that nagging unease, pulled me closer. A conversation thread, highlighted in bright blue, displayed a series of messages between my sister, Chloe, and someone saved only as Professor Evans. My breath hitched. Dr. Evans was the head of the graphic design department at the university, the same department where I was a senior, pouring my heart into my final projects. A cold wave washed over me as I started to read. Message after message detailed my sister's struggles with her own design portfolio, lamenting creative blocks and tight deadlines. Then, a line jumped out at me, a digital dagger to my chest. I've been so inspired by Paige's concepts, Professor. She leaves her files open sometimes, and her ideas are truly innovative. I've incorporated some similar structural elements, reinterpreted, of course, into my own submissions. It's helped me so much. The next message from her read, I even used her preferred font and color palette in my latest piece, just as a tribute to her brilliance. She's an absolute genius, honestly. My stomach churned, a knot of pure dread tightening with each word. This wasn't just inspiration. It was a brazen admission, laid bare on the screen. The minor invasions, the missing pen, the accessed software, it all coalesced into a monstrous, undeniable truth. Every instance I'd dismissed as carelessness, every flicker of suspicion I'd pushed aside, now screamed a different story. The hushed moments of my creative process, the hours I'd spent meticulously crafting each element of my portfolio, had been systematically plundered. My entire creative output, my very artistic essence, had been treated like a public domain resource, ripe for picking. A hot surge of indignation rushed through my veins, quickly followed by a crushing sense of betrayal. My sibling, the person I'd shared a childhood with, had been actively undermining me, stealing my intellectual property and presenting it as her own. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. It dawned on me with sickening clarity that this wasn't an oversight, not a mistake born of desperation. This was a calculated, deliberate act of deceit, executed with a chilling casualness. She had seen my vulnerability, my open files, and exploited it for her own gain. It was a conscious choice to take what wasn't hers, to profit from my effort. My hands began to tremble, a violent tremor that shook my entire frame. Humiliation burned a fiery path up my neck and across my face. How many times had I praised her innovative work, completely oblivious? How many times had she smiled, knowing the truth, while I celebrated her supposed achievements? The very foundation of our relationship, the unspoken bond of family, crumbled beneath the weight of this revelation. My heart shattered into countless jagged pieces, each one piercing a new wound. A profound sense of loss enveloped me, not just for the stolen work, but for the sister I thought I knew. The trust, once an invisible anchor, dissolved into nothingness, leaving me adrift. My sense of belonging, the comfort of knowing my place within my family, evaporated. Even my identity, Paige Sanchez, the diligent student, the aspiring designer, felt tainted by this deception. Was I truly so naive? So easily manipulated? This wasn't a crack opening. It was an entire dam breaking, unleashing a torrent of raw, unbridled anguish. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, leaving me adrift in a sea of disbelief and profound despair. The air itself felt heavy, suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just was, in the epicenter of a personal earthquake. Every memory, every shared laugh, every family dinner, now replayed in my mind through a distorted lens of her duplicity. A profound hollowness began to spread inside me, a chilling void where warmth and connection used to reside. It was the beginning of an unraveling, a tearing at the very fabric of my being. That raw anguish, a sensation so potent it nearly buckled my knees, didn't last forever. A switch flipped inside me, not instantly, but with a slow, grinding certainty. For me, Paige Sanchez, 22 and navigating life in Columbus, Georgia, a profound shift began. The world had indeed tilted. But instead of succumbing to the disorienting churn, I started seeking new footing. My first impulse involved digital space. The constant digital gaze, that feeling of being observed, had finally become intolerable. I opened my social media apps, one by one, a cold resolve settling over me. Unfollowing Chloe from everything felt like severing a phantom limb, an odd mix of emptiness and relief. My finger hovered over the block option for a moment, a deeper, more permanent cut. But I opted for a less drastic measure for now, simply restricting her access to my stories and posts. This wasn't about revenge. It was about building a wall, brick by digital brick, around my own private world. Passwords were next on the agenda. Every single one got an overhaul. Complex strings of characters replaced the easily guessable ones I'd used for years, a habit born of complacency and a misplaced sense of security. My laptop, once left casually open, now clicked shut with a definitive thud each time I stepped away. Files containing my senior projects, the ones I'd poured so much of myself into, were encrypted, tucked away behind layers of digital protection. A growing sense of ownership, something I hadn't truly experienced before, began to bloom. A few days later, a subtle shift in the household atmosphere became apparent. Mom's questions about my day, usually a perfunctory inquiry, seemed to carry a new edge. She'd ask about my progress on assignments, the details of my interactions with classmates, but her gaze lingered a little too long, searching. She seemed to notice my newfound reticence, the way I now offered vague generalities instead of specific anecdotes. My usual openness had receded, replaced by a guardedness she couldn't quite penetrate. A new tension, a subtle hum beneath the surface of our conversations emerged. It wasn't spoken, but it hovered, a palpable thing. My routine transformed. Mornings, instead of grabbing my phone to scroll through feeds, I'd spend that time sketching or reading, or just sitting in a surprising quietude. The compulsion to share every fleeting thought or achievement had diminished. If Ethan asked about my day, I chose what to reveal, editing the narrative, keeping certain parts close. He noticed, of course, but his understanding gaze offered comfort, not scrutiny. He simply observed, respecting my space. One afternoon, Mom attempted to casually pick up my journal from my desk. Its leather cover, a gift from Ethan, was usually fair game for her curious hands. But this time, a sudden, almost instinctual protectiveness surged through me. My hand shot out, covering the journal before her fingers could touch it. My gaze met hers, unwavering. A silent message passed between us. No, not anymore. The air thickened, charged with unspoken defiance. I simply held her stare, not a word needed. In that moment, a clear, firm no solidified within me, unspoken, yet absolute. She drew back, a puzzled look on her face, and I knew something fundamental had shifted. This quiet assertion of boundaries, a radical departure from my usual deference, marked a pivotal point. My sense of self was no longer up for public consumption or parental inspection. Fast forward a few weeks, and the air buzzed with nervous energy. My college graduation luncheon was underway, held in the university's grand ballroom. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dozens of families gathered at round tables. I sat with Ethan, Mom, Dad, and my sister Chloe. My cap and gown draped over the chair beside me, a tangible symbol of years of dedication. Conversations flowed, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of silverware. Chloe, perched elegantly across from me, leaned in during a lull in the chatter. Her gaze swept over my simple dress, then around the room, as if assessing everyone present. With a dismissive shrug, she said, "This whole thing feels a bit small time, doesn't it? For all the hype, it's just a glorified cafeteria meal." A familiar sting of her casual disparagement pricked at my composure. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she delivered them. A quiet pronouncement that my hard-earned milestone was somehow less. A hush fell over the room as the dean, Dr. Evans, approached the podium, a figure of academic authority. She began announcing the graduating class's highest honors. My attention drifted, anticipating the usual roster of names. Then, Dr. Evans's voice boomed, clear and resonant. And for the President's Award for Outstanding Creative Achievement, the highest honor bestowed upon a graduating senior in the Arts and Design program, recognizing exceptional talent and groundbreaking work. Paige Sanchez. A gasp escaped my lips, a rush of disbelief flooding my system. My name, spoken with such reverence, reverberated throughout the vast room. Heads swiveled in my direction. My parents beamed, their faces alight with unadulterated joy. Ethan squeezed my hand, his expression mirroring my own astonished delight. Chloe's perfect smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps surprise, perhaps resentment. Ascending to the stage, the walk seemed to stretch endlessly. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if gravity itself had eased its grip. A Supreme Court justice, a guest speaker for the ceremony, stood beside the dean, prepared to hand out this prestigious accolade. He took the microphone, his presence commanding. This young woman's portfolio, he articulated, demonstrated not just technical mastery, but a profound vision. Her innovative approach to sustainable design earned her unanimous commendation from the faculty and the award committee. She truly stands first in line among her peers, a trailblazer for future generations. The applause erupted, a wave of sound that enveloped me, warm and affirming. Receiving the heavy bronze plaque, its cool surface against my fingertips, a profound realization dawned. The small-time comment from my sister, it evaporated, becoming a distant, hollow echo. It held no power. The validation I sought, the quiet affirmation of my worth, it wasn't something anyone else could give or take away.